which point you realized that medicine was really not for you and you didn't like it?
Yeah, quite soon actually. I mean, I kind of knew that what interested me most was the things that I didn't really like about medicine. Literally, day one of med school, you could kill somebody. That doesn't happen in a normal job, right? On day one, they limit the amount of damage you can do. One of my frustrations with medicine is it didn't make a difference what happened anywhere. In medicine, as you kind of go through your career, you get narrower and narrower. You cannot be a CEO and a specialist. The person told me, above all, have an interesting life. We were co-parenting our kid, and she died really quickly. We didn't have any warning. One minute she was here, the next minute she wasn't. So she died essentially because she saw the wrong doctors at the wrong time. You resign, you quit, you have no fallback position. When I went to business school, I didn't even know how to write a CV. From after medicine, going to business school, banking was all about healthcare. At Fullerton, I raised $250 million in like a week. I could try because the trading floor and the surgeon's room were like they're the same.
Have that thought ever crossed your mind?
Every day. Are you kidding me? Any entrepreneur who doesn't say that's lying.
Join Disruptive Doctors.
I'm Dr. Selina, your host and co-founder of Disruptive Doctors. At Disruptive Doctors, we're building a platform to help doctors like you impact healthcare differently. In Postcall, we dive into the untold stories of doctors who are breaking the mold, trailblazers who are redefining what it means to be a doctor. This is Postcall Beyond the White Coat.
Today we have Dr. Ramesh Rajentheran, who is currently the founder and CEO of MiyaHealth. We'll explore why he walked away from medicine, his rise to healthcare finance world, and how a heartbreaking loss led him back to the depths of healthcare with a mission to change it. Stay tuned for an incredible journey of resilience and reinvention. So if you're ready to be inspired by your peers who are leading the change in healthcare, stick around. This is Postcall Beyond the White Coat. Hi, Dr. Ramesh.
Hi, how are you?
Great. Thanks for joining us today. You've mentioned that, previously that you hated practicing medicine. So whose idea was it to get into medicine?
Nobody is actually, I don't come from a family of doctors, but look, I grew up in Malaysia. I don't come from a rich family. And, if you're from a particular ethnic persuasion and, you are good in school and you're good at sport, then naturally you pick a profession, right? And that profession was either law or medicine. And I picked medicine, right? For no reason other than I knew I'd kind of find a job. I was lucky enough also to get a scholarship that allowed me to kind of do that without a bond, called the Commonwealth Scholarship. So it was just a series of kind of naturally occurring events rather than any real intention, I think, to go and help people or heal people. And also look, back then, this was a while back, careers like, management consulting at McKinsey or investment banking, we didn't even know what they were, right? We didn't have that level of education or resource that young kids have today. And quite frankly, but people who look like me just wouldn't go into those professions. And to be a CEO even at that point in time was something so alien and foreign, right? The way of kind of escaping the middle class, as it were, was through a profession. And that's kind of why I did it, quite frankly.
At which point you realized that medicine was really not for you and you didn't like it?
Yeah, quite soon, actually. I mean, I like medical school. Like, I had a lot of fun. I didn't do it like a normal med student from Asia. I was captain of the hockey team. I did the full-on British experience. Not, I didn't join the Malaysian society. So I kind of did it as a full-time kind of immersion thing. And I actually had a good time. I think pretty towards the end of med school, I kind of thought, okay, look, is this what I really wanted to do? But at the time, I just felt that I want to try it first before I kind of dismiss it. And I think pretty soon after just say the house officer year, I kind of knew that this is probably not going to really work out in the long term. I think what actually kept me going though was I kept achieving something. So I got really lucky. Essentially, I published a paper before I actually finished med school. And then 1 year after medical school, I accidentally found a way to kind of manage a particular kind of breast cancer. And then published on the back of that and presented at these big European meetings. So there was something that just kept me in it, even though in my heart of hearts, I kind of knew I was probably on a more fixed timeline. So somewhere in my second year or third year of medical school, I kind of had a quick look around. I actually interviewed at a big consulting firm. You can probably guess which one. I kind of got in. This is all in London, and then kind of thought, well, I'm not sure if this is really what I want to do. Why don't I do an MBA and then figure it out afterwards? So I actually applied to business schools. Luckily enough, I got in. It wasn't that easy back then because this is coming out of the dot-com crisis. So, everyone wanted to go to business school, right? Because there were no jobs. So it wasn't that easy to get in, but I got lucky. Then I did an MBA with no clear plan in mind. I just said, I'll do it. And then somewhere during the 2 years, I'll figure out what I really want to do. That's actually what happened.
Okay, so was there, I know you said there was no thought process. So was MBA because everyone was just doing it?
No, I kind of knew that what interested me most was the things that I didn't really like about medicine, was the things I liked about finance, right? So, I kind of grew up in 7, 8 countries. My parents kind of moved around, and I was always taught to believe that the world is this very big and interesting place. And one of my frustrations with medicine is it didn't make a difference what happened anywhere, right? Like it was so insular. You didn't have to read the newspaper. You just have to go in the clinic and see your patients. That was it, right? And then, there's very little mobility in medicine, whereas I kind of always thought the world is interesting and I want to deal with it in different countries. So I think there was an insularity. The other thing I kind of liked about, I'd say more about business or finance than medicine was, in medicine, as you kind of go through your career, you get narrower and narrower. Right? You start out and you specialize, then you sub-specialize, and then you kind of spend 80% of your time as a surgeon doing like one operation. That narrowness actually was kind of not appealing to me. I kind of always thought, well, actually, as I get older, what I want to do is be more and more broad, right? Which is something that business and finance kind of, offers. I think it also offered the chance to be rapidly advanced. In medicine, it's very fixed. I might have been this guy who got lucky, published papers early and was put on a fast track. But the idea of a fast track means you don't actually have to apply for a job. You still have to do the same number of years and steps to get there. Whereas I think in business and finance, if you're really good, it's a meritocracy and you can kind of jump, right? And so those kind of three elements kind of made me think, hey, maybe it's business, finance, and logically then, back then I knew nothing about how to use Excel. I barely knew how to use a computer. So it wasn't an option for me to jump straight away, right? I needed to go back to school. So that's why I did the MBA. Honestly, not a lot of research. I just went up the list of top 10 schools in the world and basically applied to the first 7. So that's kind of how I ended up at London Business School. There was no real thought process behind it.
I like what you mentioned that in medicine, as you progress in your career, you get narrower. And there are doctors who I speak to who left the profession is because they didn't like it that they were getting so boxed into a very tiny specialty and that's all they knew. And in business, you start off just doing what you're doing, but as you grow, you have to know the industry, you have to know the trends, you have to have market outlook, and your concept of how things work, it gets broader and broader. I like how you put that in words. I think I thought of that, but I couldn't put it in words.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good thing about it. I mean, if you think about it, a CEO is the ultimate general. You cannot be a CEO and a specialist, right? It doesn't work, right? You have to be a generalist and be good at different things. Even in banking, by the time you reach managing director level, like I did, I mean, again, it was more a generalist kind of thing within healthcare. So as a managing director in investment banking, I covered everything. I did life sciences, devices, hospitals, insurance, right? Not narrow, go broader. And I think that appealed. But I mean, the other reason I think for business and finance was, somebody told me when I was young, and I still can't remember who, the person told me, above all, have an interesting life, right? If you do nothing else for the rest of your life, just make sure it's interesting. And actually, that was strong motivator to kind of change because, and I'm sure we'll discuss this later. I've had more than one career, right? I didn't change careers once. I actually changed it like 7 times, right? And it was basically driven by the desire to have an interesting life. And you don't get to have an interesting life by saying no. You actually only get to do it by saying yes and jumping, right? Otherwise, the two are mutually incompatible, right? So I think that was the other appeal of business school. It is like, okay, I have a vague idea. I know nothing compared to the 350 other people who are going to be in my class. The only way to kind of make it interesting is jump and start again. That was the other appeal of business school. It was a new start, right? That's why I did it full time, right? I didn't do it part-time MBA. I did it properly.
So you resigned?
Meaning you resign, you quit, you have no fallback position. Then you do it full time and you better hope you have a job, right, at the end of it.
Well, so you're forced to make it happen.
Yeah, whereas if you do an executive MBA, there's no pressure. You can do it half and half, which is why I think, your opportunity to grow and make change is tangential. It's not absolute, right? Whereas if you do it full time, it is an absolute thing. Your life will change one way or another.
So what made you decide to go into investment banking? I know earlier you mentioned you just applied for a job, and I hear you mentioning the word lucky a couple of times, but I don't think anything is really lucky. It's preparedness plus opportunities that equates to luck. So what made you go into investment banking?
Yeah, I went to London Business School, did an MBA, and I think it changed my life. I was a huge fan, and I got into a whole bunch of US schools. Probably guess which, because I told you it's the top 7. Because, the reason I chose LBS was because I like the people, right? It's very collaborative. Like everyone helps each other. There's no kind of forced grading, as it was. So everyone's incentivized to help each other, and it's very collaborative. Because you have to bear in mind, when I went to business school, I didn't even know how to write a CV because, and we didn't have the tools you have now where you have generative AI to write a CV for banking. Like we have to do it ourselves and figure out medical CVs are very different than banking CVs. Banking CVs are 1 page. And so the only way I kind of figured out investment banking was for me, and then getting into it was really talking to my classmates, kind of being from that world. And they kind of told me what it was like. What I liked about it was a meritocracy, right? Because I can literally accelerate. There's no fixed rule. You have 3 years here, 4 years there, you do it. Especially if you do markets, like where I started out, there's no fixed rule. Like you can literally become an executive director 2 years, right? As long as you make money. So I kind of like that. I like the fact that it was full of people who like me, meaning that banking and business school, especially London Business School, it's very cosmopolitan. I was born in Japan. I think before I stopped in Malaysia and Australia. And, what I liked about banking and business school was that it was full of people who were born in one country, grew up in another, and then married to a person from a third country, right? And then living in a fourth. That was just like the norm. So I kind of like that. And, being in London, it's very cosmopolitan. It was a career that you could deal with an Italian 1 minute, Spaniard in the next minute, and a Greek, have lunch with a Greek. So I think the environment and the pace, I think, appealed. It also offered me a chance to mix healthcare with finance. I knew I didn't want to leave healthcare, right? I wanted to have some element of that because I thought it's still an interesting sector. It's just I didn't want to be a doctor. So banking offered you a chance to mix both.
How are you able to mix both in banking?
Yeah, so my entire 12 years in banking, I always did healthcare. It's the weird thing. It's still, after 25 years, the only sector, aside from 9 months of my life, it's the only sector I've ever had my entire career. I just did it from different aspects, right? From after medicine, going to business school. Banking was all about healthcare. So my first job in healthcare was, banking was actually at UBS. So it's this bank. in London, and it was to cover pharmaceutical stocks as a equity research analyst. An equity research analyst essentially are the guys who opine on things like Glaxo and Roche, put a stock price target and say buy or sell, right? And it's a very good way of learning about finance and learning everything there is to know about pharmaceutical company, how you do drug trials, how you get reimbursed in the US and all that. So I did that first. And then it was a bit adventurous. 3 months into it, my entire team left to two separate banks. I had the choice to go with one part of it. I decided to stay because I like UBS. And so they said, what do you want to do next? And I said, well, I want to try being more with clients. So they said, why don't you move to the trading floor and start selling healthcare stocks to hedge funds? So that was interesting. Yeah, because I got to cover everything from Russian biotech to US HMOs to Japanese hospitals and devices. And so my job was to sell these stocks to hedge funds, which is quite a lot of fun, right? You go to a lot of parties. It's very cool. You get to go to Formula One and all these big events with your people your own age who are clients. So a lot of my clients became my friends. Quite enjoyed that. But again, healthcare, right? And then the last job I actually did in investment banking was actually as a managing director at Barclays. I actually did M&A, mergers and acquisitions. But again, healthcare companies, right? So I ran a sector team out of Hong Kong, and we did deals in China, India, Southeast Asia, Australia, but mainly mergers and acquisitions. So drug companies, devices, you name it, anything that's associated with healthcare. So 12 years, but just doing different parts of healthcare around the world, right? In banking.
So for someone who has no idea what investment banking is or what the healthcare finance world is like how would you explain the whole thing in a nutshell for, say, a doctor who is interested in healthcare, curious about finance, curious about banking? How would you explain this?
Okay, so in finance and banking, there are generally three groups of people. Okay, they're the people who run the back office, like HR, finance, compliance, accounting, tech, just as you would in any company. Then there are the people who specialize in products, meaning that they do one product across different sectors, like derivatives, right? Or raising equity capital across different sectors. And then there are the people who are sector specialists, which they specialize maybe more than one product, but they do one sector, which is the category that I spend my entire banking career in, right? Like I was always a sector specialist. Those are people usually with a particular background in science, or maybe they work outside in production. So that's how you did it. Then the other lens you can look at finance is whether you do buy side or sell side, meaning are you investing money or are you selling stuff to the people who invest money, right? So I was always on the sell side, meaning my job in banking was to always sell stuff, to the people, or sell services to the people who are investing. Because even mergers and acquisitions, you're advising company on buying another company. It's a selling process, right? You're not the guy with the money. There is a bit of a middle ground because in the sell side, in an investment bank, sometimes you invest the bank's own money as well. So part of my job briefly was to do that, but by and large, it's sell side and then buy side. An example of buy side where you're investing money would be in a hedge fund, or you could be in a private equity fund or a VC fund. But essentially, again, even there, you're split between product and sector. So it's the same thing mirrored on both sides. That's
So
the
what do
easy
you
way to
think?
understand it.
So what was it from your medical background that you brought with you into this finance side?
Yeah, it's kind of a very weird thing to kind of say, right? But like the things that I don't regret having done medicine, because I think you learn stuff in medical school and practicing as a doctor that you don't learn in any other course, right? So you think about what you learn in medicine. One is your ability to take responsibility early, right? Literally day one of med school, you could kill somebody. That doesn't happen in a normal job, right? Because if you're an accountant or a consultant or work in a bank, on day one, they limit the amount of damage you can do, right? Whereas if in healthcare, literally, and especially back then, we had fewer protections than young doctors do now. My first weekend was 72 hours, right? Like you don't do that now, it's illegal. Back then, that's just the way we did it. So you learn early, responsibility. You learn early how to deal with a lot of pressure. Because when you've worked for 72 hours straight, 3 days after finishing medical school, trust me, no investment banking job is that hard. I know that bankers who always complain they work hard, but it's nothing like what we used to do as a junior doctor. It's much easier now, I think, for junior doctors. So maybe that comparison is skewed, but back then, I think the ability to kind of deal with pressure is a bit different. I think the third thing is you learn as a doctor how to read people really early, especially if you go to old school doctors. What we got taught was within 15 seconds of the patient walking to the room, you need to be able to tell what they do for a living, whether they're married, what their health status is, and how best are you going to communicate and to discuss them, because you need to make a connection, right? That is not something you learn in accounting or law or, whatever course you're going to do. So I think those three things were very transferable skills in investment banking, because the rest of it is just technical, right? Like you can teach anybody how to do a spreadsheet. It's not that hard. You can teach anyone how to build a financial model or do a presentation. That's easy. But the three things you can't teach are those three things, right? How do you read people? How do you deal with pressure? And how do you take accountability and responsibility for your decisions, right? So those are the three things I think that I brought across. So it was a case of when I got in, trying to emphasize that those are the things I bring that are different to other people, even though I knew nothing about finance.
Well, I like how you say we have to read someone within like 15 minutes. You have to have their whole, not just medical history, but their whole life story, because at any one point, one of it could contribute to whatever they're presenting with.
Yeah, yeah. And you get taught that very early on, and you get taught how to look for symptoms and signs in faces and stuff. And ultimately, all these jobs, right, whether you do banking or business or consulting, it's still about people fundamentally. That doesn't change.
What were the biggest challenges that you initially faced when you moved from medicine to finance? Because you had no idea what finance is and you got in. So what were the challenges you faced when you first arrived? Was it exactly what you thought it would be?
I think it helped that I already had been in the UK for a while. So I was already there for almost 10 years before I went into banking in the city in London. I think if I was moving from Singapore straight to London to be in a completely different environment, it would have been quite difficult. So I didn't really find it very difficult, to be honest with you. The stuff that I needed to learn technically was not that difficult. If you can learn anatomy, you can learn how to do a spreadsheet. It's not that hard. There was a huge barrier to learn, like, pharmaceuticals, which was my first job, right? That was a very technical stuff that you need to learn about drug trials and stuff like that. But it wasn't that hard to learn. I think the culture and the trading floor was a lot like surgery. So actually, I didn't really find it very different. But the people are almost the same. Like a bunch of surgeons and the trading floor, pretty much the same. They are just, okay, back then, unruly boys. Right now, it's a bit more politically correct. But back then, they would play pranks and whatever. So it was just normal. I didn't find it difficult. I think having to deal with different people, different cultures that rapidly, I think was new. So when you work on a trading floor in London, you literally have to balance between a Bloomberg chat conversation with a Spaniard fund manager, and then you are getting yelled at by a Japanese trader, and then you've got, a Greek guy who's speaking kind of literally Greek to you on the phone, and you have to somehow deal with all of that, which was not something we had to deal with in medicine, where, patients were more uniform, but they were more similar. So I think that was the biggest adjustment. Other than that, I didn't find it very hard at all. I know it's weird to say, but it wasn't that hard.
So did you finally feel like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do? Like I actually finally enjoy doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's because I think if I'd started in the other part of the investment bank, like something like corporate finance, which is mergers and acquisitions, where as a young associate, their job was mainly around doing PowerPoint and Excel, I think I would not have done as well, right? But because my first job was the trading floor, they put me in the right place, actually, where I could thrive, because the trading floor and the surgeon's room were like they're the same. So, for me, I think because I had that, I didn't think it was that difficult. Once I got a bit more senior in banking, that's when I actually made the shift to mergers and acquisitions. It's very different, right? They wear suits and ties. They're a bit more esoteric. It's all very technical. It's not really, are you instant gratification, right? You can spend like a year cooking a deal and have it all over. Whereas I'm trading for your P&L every day. It suited me at my time, right? So my theory about all this is really that there's a right job for you at the right. I think you shouldn't be thinking, what do I want to do for the next 30 years? Be thinking about what I want to do for the next year, because your personality will change, right? Like, and for me, being whatever it was, 32, 33 at the time, that job suited me perfectly. It was exactly my personality, right? So I didn't think I would do it forever. I just thought, well, if something interesting comes up, you say yes and you do something different, which in banking is quite common.
I like that advice because a lot of doctors, at least people I was surrounded with, and maybe myself at one point, we have this goal. You have to be a specialist before you're 30, become a consultant before you're 40. Like, you're always chasing that milestone and pushing for something that may not suit you at that time.
Yeah. And I think it's a dangerous way of thinking, because that only works if you think that you will always be the same person. But the one thing I tell younger people is, and my own kid, is that you're going to be different. You're going to be different when you're 12 than when you're 15. You're going to be different when you're 21 to 26, right? When you start medical school, you're not the same person as you are when you finish, right? So why do you assume that, you can map out your life for 30 years? Because you're not. You don't even know yourself, what you are going to be like. How on earth are you going to predict what is right for you in 20 years' time? So I don't think you should take it that seriously, so I'm saying, right? But, you do the responsible thing, sure, right? But I don't think you should be trying to map out 10 years. It's very hard because you don't know the kind of person you're going to be 2 years from now, let alone 10. That's the variable we often forget, right? That we ourselves are going to change.
Before we continue, I want to share something very special for our doctors who are listening. If you're a doctor and considering a career shift but don't know where to start, Disruptive Doctors offers a non-clinical Pathfinder workshop. This workshop is designed to help doctors like you explore new opportunities beyond clinical practice and how to choose the right path for you. Whether you're still unsure of whether you should leave medicine or ready to make a change, this workshop is tailored for you. Also, do check out our annual Disruptive Doctors Conference that happens every August, where like-minded doctors like you come together, share ideas, and impact healthcare differently. Yeah, so losing someone close is incredibly difficult. I know in 2018, your young son at the time, 5, he lost his mom, and you lost your ex-wife at that time. So tell us about that experience and how does that change your view on healthcare?
Yeah, so at the time, after I left banking, I went into industry. So essentially, I joined a client as a CFO of a company and a COO eventually. But essentially, we did a roll up. We grew this business to like 5,000 people. We bought 22 companies in 2.5 years. So my job was to buy, raise money, and integrate, right? So we built this kind of monster of a company. And we were pushing for a New York IPO. So my job became, I'm going to list us in New York and then figure out what next. Unfortunately, my kid, who was then living with his mom. So I was divorced. I married my best friend from high school. We were married for 17 years. So even though we were divorced, we were still pretty close, right? We were co-parenting our kid. And she died really quickly. We didn't have any warning. One minute she was here, the next minute she wasn't. And the reason she died was entirely preventable. So she died essentially because she saw the wrong doctors at the wrong time. Like, she had a travel-associated infection that no GP in Singapore actually asked her whether she got on a plane. Right? She saw 4 GPs, none of them asked the question. Then by the time it came time to go to a hospital because she wasn't well, her private health insurer took 4 hours to issue a letter of guarantee or letter of authorization. By which time she just said, look, I don't think I'm that sick. I'm just going to check myself into a government hospital. And actually what happened was the government hospital initially did the right thing. They gave her IV antibiotics. But during a nursing handover, they actually forgot to put the new bag up. It's very simple, right? It happened because it was Labor Day weekend and they were short-staffed. And because they forgot to do that, she came septic, essentially, right? So bacteria got out into the bloodstream. And the next thing you know, I get a call saying, hey, come into the hospital. We don't know why, but they're calling family. And I had to take my son to say goodbye to his mom on the ventilator, essentially. And try explaining that to a 5-year-old kid, right? When you just told him the day before, mommy is coming home tomorrow, your world changes, right? So essentially, I quit my job 2 days after that. Unfortunately, the IPO then got derailed. And that's a whole separate story. But, I couldn't list a $1 billion company, deal with shareholders and, look after my son. And my son came first, right? I had remarried 6 months before that to make it more complicated. And our deal was we will never have kids. So then I was like, well, I might have to be a solo parent for a bit, right? Because we don't know how good a mom my wife was going to be. So, it changed my world, right? Like, so after 6 months, turned out that my partner was an amazing mom, right? She stepped in very well. I was okay. So I felt I could do something else. Then I had to figure out what the next thing was. And so people like me normally go run another big company. We don't do startups. But I felt really angry at the way she died, honestly. And I felt like I knew how to fix it, which was, hey, let's try technology, because all these things can be fixed through tech. Why don't we navigate patients to the right doctor? And why don't we build health insurance systems that can automate letters of guarantee? So we don't have to wait 4 hours. We can do it in 2 minutes straight to your phone. And that's essentially what happened. Figured out a way how to do that. And a couple of people pushed me into it. One of our board members now basically told me, hey, if you don't try, what are you going to tell Ty you did about it? You sued a bunch of doctors, or you actually tried to fix the problem? So that's kind of how we started. We started because of wanting to fix health insurance and make sure that patients ended up in the right place.
Okay, tell us about MiyaHealth. And what does the word Miya means anything?
No, it doesn't actually. We just wanted something where everyone could pronounce. And because we are kind of pan-Asian, we wanted to make sure that it's a pan-Asian name. There was no real science behind it.
Okay, what's MiyaHealth?
Okay, so Miya, essentially, what we do is kind of fix health insurance. That's the goal, right? And the way we do it is we build these core claim systems. So when a claim gets into the system, we digitize it, we extract all the information into granular form, and we enable the machines to see whether it's fair or not, issue a letter of guarantee. And then we use that same granular data to help manage fraud, waste, and abuse. Because about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 prescriptions fraudulent or waste. So all this helps the insurer. But at the same time, we also build systems that help the patient. So meaning, if you have health insurance with one of our clients, instead of trying to figure out which doctors you're going to go to, you pull up an app, you talk to it, it'll talk back to you, it'll do the triage, it will tell you where to go, what you're covered for, and then it actually follows you up afterwards to make sure that actually you're okay. And then we bring you back into the system again. Which doesn't happen in health insurance, right? Normally health insurance is settles and then there's no follow-up. This is to enable patients to come back in again. So it's just a better experience for both the insurer and the patient. That's kind of what we do. Everything works off this very fancy machine-driven machine learning thing called the dictionary. So essentially, we found a way of harmonizing data into a common language. And that common language drives both the insurance system and the navigation.
Was it
So we've been doing machine learning for 5 years.
Was it difficult to, because you did mention, guys, like you would not have gone into a startup, would not have started a startup. In fact, you would have gone on to another big company and do what you've previously been doing. So now jumping into something completely new, was it difficult for you at the beginning?
Yeah, it's been the hardest 5 years of my life. Quite frankly, everything I've done till now has been easy. I think startups were hard, especially a blank sheet of paper. It's just turning that into an actual company, raising 10 million US dollars, or whatever it is that we've raised along the way, getting VCs. And our timing kind of sucked, to be honest. We started it just before COVID. We didn't know COVID was coming. I think had I known COVID was coming, hell no, we wouldn't have started. So we almost ran out of money more times than I can remember. Straight COVID and built the entire company remotely, right? Because we couldn't go into the office. Built a development team in Malaysia when all of us were stuck in Singapore. So I think it was just incredibly hard. I had to learn a lot of things that I didn't know. I actually didn't know anything about technology before I started. And bear in mind, as a non-technologist, we've been doing AI for 5 years. This is not new. This AI thing for us, we've been doing it 5 years. So I had to learn everything about technology from scratch. I think I had to use my superpower, which was essentially I've always been able to surround myself with people smarter than me who want to work with me for whatever reason. So that was the one thing I knew I could count on. And so I had to rely on that. I knew I was quite good at raising money, but a lot of it was new, right? Also the experience of not having any infrastructure. I spent my entire career in big bulge bracket banks, right? Like UBS, Morgan Stanley, Barclays, it's all $100 billion companies. And even Fullerton was still 5,000 people. We had infrastructure, we had teams. Here, I had nothing, right? Like I had to do everything myself. I had to build my financial model myself, PowerPoint myself. As a very privileged managing director or CFO, I have teams of people to do this for me, right? So it's been quite a new experience. And also, obviously, when you're a startup, you don't pay yourself a real big salary, so it's been a massive pay cut, right? From what it was, right? So I have to learn a lot of stuff again.
Did you start as a company of one?
You never really start with a company of one unless you're suicidal, quite frankly. So the first step is once you figure out what you roughly want to do, you get co-founders. So I always have co-founders. I have two others at Mia. And honestly, they are the reason we're still around, right? I think left to me, we would have probably not survived past year one, right? But I have very good co-founders who kind of, share everything together. Yeah.
Did you know from the very beginning, say for those who are running startups like me, did you know from the very beginning that this is actually what I'm going to build?
No, I mean, the one truism is you pivot and pivot again. All great tech companies, speaking about tech, but I think more broadly about real businesses too. I think they all pivot. YouTube wasn't YouTube. Slack wasn't Slack. I think YouTube was a dating site, if I remember correctly. All these things change and your ability to pivot is what matters. Even at Mia, I can't go too much into it, but we're trying to do another pivot. May not be the last one. Could be the fatal one, obviously, but you never know that, right? It will obviously.
Was it easy or difficult for you to get buy-ins for Mia? I mean, you grew the company and I saw you guys have raised your first round and you're expanding to Philippines, Indonesia. Was it easy for you to get buy-ins considering your background? You were CFO of Fullerton, COO of Fullerton, and you had an impressive investment banking resume. I mean, all these guys. So was it easier for you? Did you feel it was easier?
Yes and no. Yes, because I have a track record of raising a lot of money in the past. I think yes, because you are personally credible. But no, because of the idea. The idea was so vast, to try and change health insurance, which is a big thing, right? You're not trying to change a small thing. A small thing would be trying to fix one part of health insurance, maybe the claims process or maybe the customer experience, which is what most people try to do. They don't try to fix the whole thing. So I think from the idea, that was an issue. Trying to build that particular company, which is really about infrastructure rather than a point-to-point solution. So it's very easy to kind of conceptualize an app, right? An app does one thing. It's easy, right? And you can just measure it by the number of people who download it. But if you try to do infrastructure, these hardcore systems that essentially great. Once you're in, you make money for 10 years, but getting in is hard because these are mission critical systems without which the insurer literally dies. So are they going to buy from a 1-year-old company? So from that point of view, it was hard. It was also hard because, trying to raise money when you have no infrastructure. At Fullerton, I raised $250 million in like a week, right? To a perpetual bond. But guess what? I had Credit Suisse helping me. So I had a very good team, don't get me wrong. We still have to market it. We still have to get our road shows and whatever. But it's a 2-day launch show to raise $250 million. Right? sure, you have to do 60, 70 VC meetings. That's just VCs, right? And then each VC maybe have 3 meetings. That's only like 150, 200 meetings just to raise a small amount of money, like $5 million. So I had to get used to that. It was no longer going to be easy for me to raise these big sums of money. This was going to be a lot harder. So I think yes and no, right? There's personal credibility versus the company, and that's different.
So what keeps you going when things get tough?
I think a few things. Okay, so there is what other people would think, and there's reality, right? What other people think is when you read all these blogs about startups or startup sites, they always say, oh, the mission keeps you going or the vision keeps you going. Actually, I don't think that's true. I think for most entrepreneurs, it's kind of like the fear of failure, of letting other people down. And as doctors, actually, that's something that's worse for us because deep down as doctors, we're actually pathologically afraid of letting other people down. We just are, right? It's why doctors make a particular kind of parent. We're actually very worried about letting our kids down. Honestly, that's what so drives me. I think it's still, I just do not want to let my co-founders down. I don't want to let our investors down. Bear in mind that some of my investors are my friends. So I think that's kind of something that so you kind of keep going because the other weird thing about startups is that startups never die. Everyone thinks they do. They actually can live as long as you want them to live. Because ultimately, as an entrepreneur, you're the one who pulls the plug. The company can survive in a zombie state forever, can survive forever. It's still out there. You're the person that decides when to pull the plug, right? When the cost of continuing to you emotionally is more than the benefit continuing to you, for you, right? And so I think it's just that. Ultimately, it boils down to a decision-making committee of the co-founders. And, your desire to keep going is whether you want to let your co-founders down, right? I think that
Have that thought ever crossed your mind?
every day.
Ever?
Are you kidding me? Any entrepreneur who doesn't say that's lying. I think even I've met really big entrepreneurs, people who started multi-billion-dollar companies. Like some of them you would have read about. And actually, in private, they all say the same thing. I bet you even Mark Zuckerberg thinks every day you should give up. I'm 100% sure. Because you think about it, at both ends of the spectrum, right? If you are struggling as a startup, starting to get going or struggling with money, and like 90% of startups are struggling now because of the fundraising environment, there's no day that will go by that you don't think about giving up. And then the other end of the extreme, now run $100 billion company. You have more money than God. And you start to deal with all the crap that comes with shareholders and all the persistent pressure and different stakeholders asking for different things. You're going to think, I should give up. I don't need the money anymore. I've made it. Right? So there's no class of entrepreneur on earth that doesn't believe that they should give up every day. It's just whether or not they should, the decision point based on whether it's worth emotionally, I think.
It's your son who keeps you going to maybe
No,
not to be.
actually, he doesn't. To be honest with you, I think my family would rather me do almost anything else but this. Right? They support me because, I have a very supportive. I've always been blessed by supportive wives, teams, and I have supportive kids who just want daddy to be happy. But I think their life would be a lot easier if I didn't do this. Especially since I started a second company as well. So I actually have two. And so, although I'm less involved with that second one, Mia takes up 90% of my time, but still, I'm invested in it. Still also want a co-creation, if you like. So no, actually, ultimately, the only thing that motivates an entrepreneur is internal. I don't think it's external at all.
Okay, so now looking back, I mean, you initially started with this fire because you lost your ex-wife to a system that was broken and could have been fixed by technology. And where you are right now, how do you think MiyaHealth has, or you as a co-founder and CEO of MiyaHealth, have impacted healthcare differently?
I think we've shown that you can do a lot of things. So some of the things that we thought were nuts. Like, so I wanted to build a navigator that lives on your phone and tells you where to go. And everyone told me that was crazy. Like, you're going to build this proactive thing. It's not even reactive. It's not a chat. It actually thinks ahead and goes back to you and get it approved as a medical device, which we did. We actually had software approved because we believe that I believe all these things should be regulated because they handle data and you're advising patients. These things should be regulated. And so it's been quite a journey to do that. Not many Asian companies have ever done this in Europe, which we did. We actually had this approved as a European medical device. So I think it's pretty cool that right now, a bunch of patients in Poland are using our device to help them manage diabetes day to day. The machine is speaking Polish to them. Nobody in my company speaks Polish, right? And it's built by this other company 7,000 miles away, right? Like, I think that's pretty cool. So I think we've done some good. I think the clients who have implemented our system for insurance properly are getting some benefit out of it. And hopefully they reinvest their savings into better products, better insurance, better customer experience. I think we as a company need to now figure out whether we continue down this path or whether we do a pivot and actually try to have impact on a bigger scale, which is something we're trying to do now, right? Because sometimes the way to have impact is not always just through tech. Maybe it's providing a service. And as a CEO and founder, I always have to think, right? Like, am I the best person to take us through that next phase, which I may not be, right? Like, so we're at that point where we need to make these decisions. And so we'll see. I think, hopefully we continue to have some positive impact, for Mia on insurance. It's been very different with the other business we started, which was more around men's health. That one, it's a bit quicker gratification. It's, it's clinic, you see patients straight away, you know whether they're happy or not. Whereas when you do tech, sometimes you don't know for months or years whether you have an impact or not. So very different kind of experience.
So what made you decide to start up the second one, a men's health clinic?
Yeah, so that one was just more selfish. That one was just because I was approaching 50. I started reading about what happens to men when they start getting to that age. I started reading about andropause. And then I discovered I knew nothing about andropause because in medical school, we do 6 months of obs and gynae. We do almost no time on men's health, aside from prostate cancer. When did you learn about anything like this in medical school? Maybe a bit of erectile dysfunction, maybe, but not. You don't learn much about it. Men's health is actually very broad. So it kind of got me thinking, wow, if I don't know about it, then surely other people don't know about it. And then coincidentally, a co-founder, Anthony, I like to call him my millennial co-founder because we had separate generations. So he came and he said, hey, I want to start, I've been thinking about starting men's health. And I thought, okay, that's great, but let's do more with it, right? So there are certain things I wanted to show. I wanted to prove that you can actually have changed the way a clinic is designed. Clinics haven't had a redesign for 200 years. We have these big counters. Why do you even need a counter in the clinic? Makes no sense. Why can't it be like an Apple store, right? So we wanted to redesign the clinic experience. So that was another motivation to show it could be done. I still didn't understand why people go to a clinic and have to wait. Like, if you pay money, you should be able to see the doctor. So I wanted to change that. And then I really wanted to show that we could use the clinic for other things, which was to project a brand, right? So we have our own hair loss and face moisturizers, and I wanted to use the clinic to project the brand. So those were all the things we wanted to show, right? That we could, and then also create a safe space for men, because men are not great when it comes to asking for help for a lot of these things. There are a lot of areas where men are actually quite underserved. So we wanted to create a safe space for them as well. So those were the motivations behind kind of starting it. And it's gone really well, right? Like, so we're starting another second clinic in KL. We're opening here in Singapore as well. And then Jakarta, Manila next year.
Okay, so for doctors who maybe want to follow in your path, do you recommend them to take up an MBA?
I think what I often tell people and what I'm trying to teach my own son, hopefully he's actually listening, is all journeys start with knowing yourself. I know it sounds like a very Zen, weird, new age thing to say, but, people tend to think about, should I do an MBA? Should I do this? Should I do that? Actually, you can't actually decide any of those things unless you really have very good self, right? So I think you have to look at yourself first. What motivates you? What do you enjoy doing? What do you want to do at the next stage of your life? Do you have a supportive partner? right? Because all these things count. And once you have a very good idea of what makes you happy, what motivates you, what gives you energy, then and only then do you then figure out what I want to do next, and then what do I need to do to get there, right? So it's hard before those. I think an MBA is the right thing for some people. It's absolutely the wrong thing for many people. Going to do an MBA in a top 10 school is good for some people. It's a terrible idea for other people. There's so much individual choice. It's the same, right? Like anyone who wants to start a business, I often say, there's more than one way to be an entrepreneur, right? Like you don't have to do what I did, which is start blank sheet of paper, roll the dice on DCs, do that kind of sexy entrepreneurship. Really, a much better model for many people is, hey, you bootstrap it, use your own money first, you grow it slowly. Or if you're a particular kind of entrepreneur with a track record, then, hey, I'm going to raise $100 million, buy a business and transform it. That's also entrepreneurship, and it suits you at your phase of life as well. The other thing I'd say is, start with self-knowledge, but you don't necessarily have to overthink it. You kind of have to think that at the end of the day, what's the worst thing that can happen to you? Nobody died if you get it wrong. And look, let's face it, like, I have to bear in mind, right? Look, if Mia doesn't work, which who knows, it may not do, right? Like, and if it doesn't work, then what's the worst case scenario? Well, I still have family, I have friends, I still have a degree, I still have a lot of transferable skills. I will go and find something else. So I think that's the key, right? As well is start thinking in terms of what's the worst thing that can happen to you. Because a lot of people don't decide because they're paralyzed by fear. But like honestly speaking, how bad can it get, right? For you as an individual.
Do you ever think like, yes, I'm running a startup, I need to bring money in, and I also have to put food on the table for my kids,
Yes.
my family.
Yes.
How do you manage those thoughts?
Yeah, it's actually very hard. And actually, it's a dichotomy, right? Statistically speaking, the most successful startups are started by people in their 40s. The young entrepreneur who kind of sold the company before he's 30, that's actually an outlier. If you look at it statistically, most entrepreneurs are in their 40s when they're successful. I think the founder of KFC started it when he's 55 or something like that, right? Like it's insane. But the problem with that is that at that age, right, you become used to a particular way of living, the quality of life, the standard of living. Okay, yes, you've made hopefully some money so that you have a bit of a nest egg, right? So you're not going to be out on the streets with bills, right? Perversely, and you'd have to compromise, right, on the standard of living. Whereas you think if you're 26-year-old, you probably eat ramen for a year, right? To be okay. Instant noodles, right? That's really something. So I think it is a bit of a paradox. I think speaking personally, I would say that it's been hard, 5 years without a proper paycheck, I'd say. I was in a privileged position to be able to do it because I had some money saved up, and I never really lived that lavishly, right? As a banker, I never let it get to my head, right? So I still never paid for business class seat in my life, right? Even though I could afford it when I was a banker, I just was raised differently, right? So because I didn't do those things, I actually had some savings. So I've been able to do it, but I have compromised on how I live, right? I did the whole Porsche 911 thing when I was younger. So I've got it out of my system. I don't need it anymore. I don't even have a car. I take the bus, take the MRT, take public transport. And actually what I've learned is when you simplify your life, actually, it's actually better for you in a way. You have to worry about stuff so much, you don't have to buy designer clothes. To me, hey, Zara's pretty good. Like, you don't need designer, right? The trade-off is actually not that big, right? As long as you have what is most important to you, which is kind of family and your friends. Yeah, you get to work out every day, travel every now and then. You don't always have to stay in the Ritz-Carlton to be happy, still get to go to Taipei anyway, just don't stay in the Ritz, right? So I think simplifying your life, I think has a lot of merit to it. I think in a way, teaches you what's important.
So any regrets leaving medicine?
Ironically, a little bit every day. You would have thought that somebody like me, the answer would be no. I think that's a lie. I think all doctors, when they leave, they regret a little bit every day. Okay, so in some ways, it will never leave you, right? It will never will. I can never not look at a person and not see hyperthyroidism. Like I can't unsee what I've seen, right? I'm still the default doctor for all my friends and my wife, my kid, right? Like Daddy's the guy they go to kind of stitch them up, right? Like, so he will never leave me. I can still look at house and figure out what's wrong. I saved the kid's life by a pool some years ago because I did CPR. You never leave you, right? But I think what I miss a small amount of is the immediacy of it. And I think doctors take it for granted. Actually, quite often they get to see the results of what they do almost instantly. Or at the very least, there's a time lag of a week or a month. Even in psychiatry, you get to see some impact within a month. Whereas you go build a tech company, you may not see any impact for years, especially if you do deep tech and AI and machine learning like us, like good luck, right? Like it's going to be 3 years before you see. And I think I missed that immediacy. I also missed the fact that it's actually an important job. Medicine's an important job. At the end of the day, yeah, I run a tech company. If the tech company disappears tomorrow, yeah, we would miss it. Our employees would miss it, our investors and our clients. But, you know, it's different with medicine because, if you mess up or you do some good, the whole patient's family feels it straight away, right? Like it has a more direct impact on people. So I do miss it a bit. But I mean, the good part is you'll always be a doctor in some shape or form. It'll never really leave you.
I think I really understand that because I practiced I was in the system for 10 years. And I remember at one point, whenever I looked at anyone in the shopping mall, I can see difficult intubation, difficult intubation, difficult intubation.
Correct.
That was all I saw.
Correct. Correct. And it's an incredible privilege to be a doctor. I think, like people often ask me, like, what do you really need? Right? Because there's the pull factor of finance. But like, was there a push factor? And then I kind of tell all those things like I described. But I also think it's also the kind of personality you are. For me, I kind of have this view of medicine that to be truly world class as a doctor, it has to be more than a job. It has to be it's not even a profession, it's actually a vocation. It is something that, you would do for free, right? And the very best doctors in the world, and I have a few friends who are world class, generally, they would do this for free. I have a friend who's an eye surgeon in London. He's spectacularly successful in London, but if you told him tomorrow, bro, you get paid zero, he would still be an eye surgeon. My sister was a psychiatrist would still be there. And that's why they are world-class doctors, right? And for me, it was always a job. It was never a vocation. And I never felt in my heart of hearts that I would be a world-class doctor, even though on the face of it, I published on breast cancer 1 year out of living med school. And you would think that's going to be a rock star career, right? Which it was headed to be a rock star career. But I think, honestly, I didn't think like I would be that world class at it. And I'm the kind of person who needs to be world class at everything. I'm pathologically not wired to not be world class at something. So for me, I was never good. It was not a good fit, right? So I think for people thinking of leaving medicine, I think again, you have to know yourself and know what you'd be giving up if you were to leave. But if you've made that determination, don't let the fear of what comes next stop you from doing it. That's what I'm saying. That's the message, right? Just because it's a scary world doesn't mean you don't jump, because you don't get to have that interesting life unless you jump, right? But if you stay, then fine. You have a less interesting life. That is your life. Nothing wrong with that. Then just go and be really good at medicine and be happy that that's the choice you made, right? And don't regret it, right?
Any regrets leaving your high-flying job and starting up a startup?
Every day. I don't have any infrastructure. Miss a team. I sometimes think, every day I think, am I making the most of my skill set? Is it too small a canvas for me, right? Am I meant to be drawing on a much bigger canvas? And I know it sounds narcissistic and all that, but I think that's the honest truth, right? Like you will think about that every day. If my career trajectory at one point was I go and run Pfizer, what the hell am I doing running a small company? Because that's what people at my CV normally do. So I think about it every day, frankly. And then, you kind of suck it up and say, okay, fine, look, if this doesn't work out, there's still time, right? And I think that's for me still time, right? Because I'm 51, I'm not. If I was 61, I think it'd be very different. I think at 51, to kind of leave and start again, right? Like it's not, not the end of the world. I can still go and run a big company.
Yeah, you can always go back to doing what you were doing previously.
Yeah, it's not so easy, but yeah, I mean, and the reality is, Singapore, it's a small market. This is not London, or the US where you have more to play with. So there's some barriers, but it's not impossible. But yeah, I mean, like honestly, I think every startup founder will tell you the same thing. Like they will think every day, am I not meant to be running something bigger than a startup?
Okay, any last words, Dr. Ramesh?
No, I just say, like I said, I think one of the realities in medical school, and I wish we had learned this in medical school, which is they never taught us how to know ourselves. You spend your entire time focusing on other people, how to treat other people. You forget that actually, self-knowledge is kind of the most important thing, right? That you're not thought of, not, you're not take some time out to reflect if you're thinking of making a change, right? Don't figure out what you're going to do next. Figure out yourself. Talk to as many people as you can talk to who know you the best, right? Sometimes it's useful to get other people's opinion. What you're good at, what makes you happy, how do you get energy, and then figure out, okay, look, what do I want to try next? Is it go back to school, retrain, or try a new career, or hey, I can start a business on the side while doing medicine 3 days a week, and if it takes off, jump. Those are all valid choices, right? But before you get to that point, make sure you know yourself and your stage in life. And then just be very cognizant that whatever you decide, you will probably change again in 2 years. And that's okay. Don't think that you're making a decision for 20 years. You're actually only making a decision for 2 years. That's the way to think about it. It becomes a lot less scary as well, right?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ramesh. If you guys are joining our conversation so far and you're thinking of exploring new career path, remember to check out our non-clinical pathfinder workshop at Disruptive Doctors, and that's where we are actually going to help you discover yourself and navigate through opportunities beyond the clinical setting. Until then, please follow us on social media, subscribe to our podcast, leave a review. I'm Dr. Selina. This is Disruptive Doctor. Keep disrupting the norm. Thanks, Ramesh.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Join disruptive doctors.